So I want to switch gears a little bit and talk about the issue that's been in the headlines all over social media, which is the territorial dispute with Guyana. So we saw this new political front open up as a result. We're seeing this becoming a major issue for Venezuela domestically, but also internationally. Now, putting aside the legal details of Venezuela's legitimate claim, to be honest, it seems like Venezuela mostly stands alone on this issue. China, which is a key ally of Venezuela, has oil interests in these disputed waters. CARICOM, which had good relations with Venezuela, particularly as a result of Petrocaribe, has rallied behind Guyana. So even on social media, you see people who are starting to treat Guyana as a victim of so-called Venezuelan aggression. And we're seeing the repeat of some of the language that the State Department has used, calling it a communist dictatorship and all that. All that to say, it seems like people outside of the country don't really realize Venezuela's claim and that Venezuela has always viewed the Essequibo region as their rightful territory. Even on the maps, for the longest time, it said territorio en reclamación, a territory that is in process of being restored. Now, if you could help our listeners understand, where does Venezuela's claim stand from? We've seen the government already take some steps to follow through on the referendum's mandate, this referendum that happened that very recently that declared that they reject the international court, that they defend this claim to the region. So, with the government already taking steps on it, is a military conflict for Venezuela and Guyana on the horizon?
And yes, this is definitely the subject that everyone is talking about. It is understandably because there's a lot of saying that there is a conflict that is brewing there. So, but like you said, Venezuela has always considered the Essequibo territory as part of the country. So this isn't something new for Venezuela. It isn't something that we just suddenly made up in the last few years. Venezuela has considered the Essequibo to be part of the territory since it gained independence from Spain in the early 1800s. However, in 1899, an arbitration award granted the Essequibo to the United Kingdom, which was Guyana's former colonizer. So Guyana has had control over the Essequibo ever since 1899. Nonetheless, Venezuela has always fought against this ruling because the panel didn't have any Venezuelan negotiators, so Venezuelan interests weren't being represented during these times. So eventually, in 1966, Venezuela managed to finally revive this subject about the Essequibo, and that is when both parties, Guyana and the United Kingdom and Venezuela, signed the Geneva Agreement, which is an agreement that basically it says that Guyana and Venezuela have to find a negotiated solution to the Essequibo territorial dispute, and they have to find this solution talking as two independent states without the intromission of the United Kingdom or any other former colonizer. The problem is that nothing happened. I mean, the agreement was there, but there were no talks, no discussion, no further agreements. So the dispute sort of like it became something that both countries began to ignore. And although the legal battle was still there, but nothing was happening. Of course, there were several points in history when Venezuela tried to revive this legal battle. But like I said, there was really no conflict. And the problem is that once we find out that ExxonMobil and Guyana found oil in 2015 in the Essequibo waters, then that's when the conflict becomes really important because now we're talking about a massive amount of resources in the Essequibo that Guyana is planning to exploit with ExxonMobil, which is a corporation that, as we know, it is responsible for environmental crimes in Latin America and around the world. So, yes, since then, since 2015, it is really when the conflict began to grow. And because Guyana, of course, saw its own economic interest being threatened, it went to the International Court of Justice in 2018 to try to have the ICJ to uphold the ruling of 1899. Venezuela, however, doesn't recognize the jurisdiction of the International Court of Justice, so the case is being reviewed by the court, but Caracas hasn't really accepted that the court has the jurisdiction to review the case. Well, ever since this process in the ICJ began, we've seen like this battle of wars between Venezuela and Guyana, and we've seen the conflict sort of like arise in these last few months. And I personally don't see a military conflict happening because I think neither country is going to win. They will both come out with even weaker economies, and they will both become vulnerable to foreign intervention. And I think both the Venezuelan and the Guyana governments know this. So far, what I see is a lot of senseless bravado, but from both nations, while both governments are ignoring the needs and the feelings of the people who are actually living in the Essequibo. So nobody has asked them what they want. Nobody has asked the Essequibo people if they want to be part of Venezuela, if they want to be part of Guyana, or if they want to be independent. So now, about Guyana being perceived as the victim of Venezuelan aggression, I don't truly agree with this because Venezuela has never threatened with the use of military force. It has never said they are going to invade the Essequibo or anything like that. Guyana, on the other hand, has invited foreign armies to defend the Essequibo, including the U.S. Southern Command. And that is extremely dangerous and mostly stupid thing to do when you take into consideration how the U.S. has destroyed countries around the world with their armies. So that said, I do understand why Guyana will feel threatened given Venezuela is a bigger country. And I also understand that from Guyana's point of view, they will be losing some, 60% of their territory. And of course, personally, that doesn't sit well with me. So this also explains why countries like Brazil and even Cuba are supporting Guyana, which additionally is a nation that it is still trying to overcome poverty and inequalities left by centuries of colonization. So yeah, I think that explains why these countries are supporting Guyana primarily. Although I do think that most of these nations uh, agree that the best solution is simply to talk and to find a negotiated solution to the disputed territory. About the measures that President Maduro announced that were perceived as something aggressive as well, let me name some of them. So President Maduro said that he was going to propose a law to create a new Venezuelan state called Guayana Essequiba, and Venezuela is going to offer the people in the Essequibo Venezuelan identity cards and social programs. Maduro also ordered the Venezuelan state oil company PDVSA to begin granting licenses for oil exploration in the Essequibo. Something we can only assume is something that could happen in the future if Venezuela wins the legal battle and recovers the Essequibo. Because at the moment, none of these measures really matter because Venezuela is not in a position to enter the Essequibo territory because it does not control that land, and Venezuela is also not in the interest of sparking a military confrontation. So I believe these measures announced by Maduro are mainly to reassure the Venezuelan people that he is doing everything in his power to recover the Essequibo, and that Venezuela is ready to welcome the Essequibo population, and also to prove that the government has future plans for the territory and its resources that could be continued by future presidents of Venezuela who inherit the legal battle. And to be honest, given the criminal history of US corporations in Latin America, ideally, I would prefer if Guyana and Venezuela unite against ExxonMobil, unite against Chevron, against the United States, and that they will find a way to use the resources in the Essequibo to improve living conditions for the people in the Essequibo and for the people of both nations. I mean, ultimately, the real enemy here will always be the United States, will always be the corporations that are trying to exploit our territories.
Yeah, just to add something quick, Andreina already gave a great summary. I would recommend people go to our website because we also published an infographic on the Essequibo dispute, really trying to trace these basically 200 years of dispute and the most important flashpoints along the way. And I think this final point is where I wanted to jump in. There's been there's been a war of words and a lot of bravado from both sides. There's a heightening of tensions across the border, which again, I agree with Andreina, and I really hope I'm not wrong about this. I don't think there's going to be a military conflict. It would really contradict Venezuela's international position over the years. I mean, Venezuela has, even to a fault, always harped on this chord of international law and all that. So Venezuela really is insisting on a return to direct talks, and of course, it's trying to leverage its position as best as possible, even with some we could call premature announcement. That being said, the issue of oil is really where it all comes down to. And one thing that I kind of wished was more in the discourse is this idea that Andreina was making of that the two countries and the entire region, the Caribbean region, should identify this common enemy of U.S. imperialism. And there are precedents. I mean, Petrocaribe was a precedent that saw how natural resources in the region could be used for the development, kind of autonomous, independent development of these small Caribbean nations on favorable conditions, without the impositions of U.S. imperialism or corporate interests. And in the case of Guyana, the same thing. I mean, we just stumbled upon an expose by The Intercept, which said something like, it's not clear where ExxonMobil ends and where the Guyanese government begins. So it really is an outsized influence of this corporation. And here, there are alternatives, there are precedents. There's the blueprint of how Venezuela dealt with oil corporations during the Chavez years, imposing sovereignty, imposing much more favorable conditions for the state, and that in turn translating to, social programs and all of that. So I think that's a part that has been missing in this kind of escalating issue, with the looming shadow of U.S. imperialist intervention. There were some suggestions by Lula da Silva yesterday of setting up some mediation. I think that will be useful, and I'll also bring in a kind of regional perspective to de-escalate tensions and hopefully, put this issue of the region uniting, as opposed to letting foreign powers, sow division.
Yeah, absolutely. Wholeheartedly agree, especially in the sense that there's almost an inclination of some people, some observers, to treat this as if it's some kind of schoolyard disagreement with one country bullying another. We need to look at the class dynamics at play. Well, who are the actors involved in this? What role does ExxonMobil play? What is U.S. capital doing? What is U.S. imperialism doing here? And not get too confused, and also appreciate that there's been this historical effort to portray Venezuela in a negative light in the international community. And by that, I mean with this effort to take them to the International Criminal Court. Now we're seeing this language of them trying to be a bully or being aggressive and all of that.